The day my wedding turned into a federal investigation. 3 months before my wedding, I discovered the man I was about to marry didn't even exist. For 2 years, my fiancé told me his family was gone and that there was no one left for me to meet. And I believed him until a hospital called his phone, and I found 17 letters hidden in a locked drawer begging someone named Daniel Mercer to come home. 2 days later, the FBI told me the man I loved was a professional con artist who had already stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from other women. And the cake tasting he scheduled for our wedding turned into a federal arrest at exactly 11:42 that morning. In 2026, he was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft. My name is Nora Whitaker, and this is the story of how the man I thought I was marrying turned out to be a lie. FBI agents walked into the living room of my fiancé's parents' house. I thought there had to be some kind of mistake. People like me did not end up in the middle of federal investigations. I was a dental hygienist from Ohio who spent most days cleaning teeth and reminding patients to floss. Nothing about my life was dramatic. At least that was what I believed until one of the agents looked at me and asked a question that made my stomach drop. How long have you known Caleb Porter? That was the moment the ground beneath my life started to shift. My name is Nora Whitaker. I am 35 years old, and I have worked at Lakeview Family Dental in Akron, Ohio, since 2017. Until recently, my world was small and predictable. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery downtown. Every morning smelled like cinnamon rolls and fresh bread. My commute was 10 minutes. My weekends were quiet dinners with friends, grocery shopping, and long phone calls with my mother. And I was planning a wedding. In early June of that year, I was supposed to marry a man named Caleb Porter. Looking back now, there were things about Caleb that never fully made sense. Small details that I brushed aside because they did not fit the picture I wanted to believe. People in love are very good at explaining away uncomfortable questions. The biggest one was his family. For almost 3 years, Caleb had told me the same story about his parents. According to him, they had struggled with alcohol most of his childhood. Their house had been chaotic, loud, unpredictable. He said leaving that environment had been the healthiest decision he ever made. Whenever I asked if I might meet them someday, he would smile in that soft, careful way of his and say I deserved better memories than the ones he had. At first, that explanation felt reasonable. But as our relationship grew more serious, the absence began to feel strange. We were planning a wedding, talking about buying a home, discussing children. Yet there was an entire side of his life that remained sealed off like a locked door. My mother, Diane Whitaker, noticed it long before I did. She is 62 and spent most of her life working as a middle school counselor. She has an instinct for reading people that borders on unsettling. The first time Caleb came to dinner, she was polite, warm, and observant. After he left, she rinsed a coffee mug at the sink and spoke without turning around. A man who hides his family is hiding something else. I remember feeling defensive immediately. Caleb had been kind, attentive, and patient from the beginning. He brought flowers when I worked late. He fixed a loose cabinet in my kitchen without being asked. He remembered the names of my coworkers and the birthdays of my friends. To me, he seemed thoughtful and steady. I told my mother she was being unfair. She dried the mug slowly before answering. People can be kind and still be lying, Nora. We argued for nearly 2 weeks after that conversation. I stopped returning her calls. I told myself she was projecting her own fears. Then, one evening, while hanging Caleb's coat in the closet, I found an envelope in the inside pocket. The return address was a house in Canton, Ohio. I did not mention it to Caleb. The next morning, I wrote the address on a small piece of paper and folded it into my purse. 2 days later, I was driving south on Interstate 77 with my hands tight on the steering wheel. Canton was about 40 minutes from Akron, close enough that I had passed the exit dozens of times without thinking about it. That afternoon, every mile felt longer than it should have. I kept hearing my mother's voice in my head. A man who hides his family is hiding something else. The neighborhood I eventually turned into was quiet and modest. Maple trees lined both sides of the street. their branches still bare from winter. The houses were small but carefully maintained. Nothing about the area suggested the chaotic environment Caleb had described. I parked across the street and stared at the address written on my paper. The house was painted pale blue, a narrow porch wrapped around the front with white railings and 2 empty flower pots waiting for spring. A welcome mat sat in front of the door. Bless this home. For a moment, I stayed in the car listening to my own breathing. Then I stepped out and walked up the driveway. When I knocked, the sound echoed softly through the quiet hallway inside. A few seconds later, the door opened. A woman in her mid-60s stood there wearing a green cardigan and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She looked more like a retired librarian than the mother of a man raised in chaos. She studied me with polite confusion. "Can I help you?" I swallowed and tried to keep my voice steady. "I am looking for Mr. and Mrs. Porter." Her expression shifted slightly. "Yes, we live here." My heart began to beat faster. "My name is Nora Whitaker," I said it carefully. "I am engaged to your son, Caleb Porter." The color drained from her face so suddenly it felt like the air changed in the room. Before she could respond, a voice called from deeper in the house. "Clara, who is it?" A tall, older man stepped into the hallway. He looked close to 70, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and tired eyes. I started explaining before either of them could ask. "My name is Nora. I am engaged to Caleb Porter. We're getting married this summer, and I thought it was finally time I met his parents." The man stared at me as if I spoke in the wrong language. "Our son's name is Daniel." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. Then his expression twisted. He lifted one hand to his chest and inhaled sharply. Clara moved toward him instantly. "Arthur!" He took one step backward and collapsed onto the hardwood floor. The sound of his body hitting the ground snapped me out of the confusion. Clara dropped beside him, shaking his shoulders and calling his name again and again. "Arthur, stay with me." I knelt next to them and pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers trembling as I dialed emergency services. The operator answered quickly, and I forced myself to speak clearly. "Male patient, late 60s, chest pain, possible heart attack, Maple Ridge Drive in Canton." While I spoke, Clara grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes searched my face desperately. "You said you were engaged to who?" "Caleb Porter." Her grip tightened. "Who is Daniel to you?" I felt a cold wave move through my stomach. "I don't know anyone named Daniel." Sirens appeared in the distance a few minutes later. Paramedics rushed inside with equipment and quickly began working on Arthur where he lay on the floor. Oxygen mask, blood pressure cuff, quiet professional voices moving through practice steps. I stepped back toward the doorway to give them space. That was when another vehicle turned onto the street and stopped behind the ambulance. It was a dark SUV with tinted windows. 2 people stepped out wearing plain suits. They walked toward the house with calm, purposeful steps. When they entered the living room, the taller one held up a leather badge wallet. "Federal Investigation." He looked directly at me. "Ma'am, what is your name?" "Nora Whitaker." "And how long have you known a man named Caleb Porter?" "Almost 3 years." He exchanged a quick glance with the woman standing beside him. Then he looked back at me. "We have been looking for that man for nearly 2 years." And standing there in a stranger's living room watching paramedics lift an unconscious man onto a stretcher, I realized something I had never imagined possible. The man I thought I was marrying turned out to be a lie. Chapter 2. The Man I Thought I Was Marrying. I met Caleb Porter on a rainy evening in April of 2022 at a charity fundraiser in downtown Columbus. At the time, I thought it was one of those ordinary nights that would fade into memory like so many others. Now I know it was the beginning of something that would change the course of my life. The event was being held for a children's hospital. It was the kind of gathering where everyone wore name tags and pretended they were comfortable making small talk with strangers. I had come alone after work, still wearing the navy scrubs from the dental clinic where I had spent the afternoon cleaning plaque and reminding people to floss. I was standing near the refreshment table, trying to decide how long I needed to stay before it would be polite to leave, when Caleb walked over. He asked if the chair beside me was taken. His voice was calm and steady, the kind that made people instinctively relax. He was tall, with dark hair that looked like it had never been out of place in his life. I said the chair was free. Within 10 minutes, he knew where I worked, what neighborhood I lived in, and that I owned a stubborn orange cat named Franklin. I had mentioned the cat only once, yet he repeated the name perfectly. "You have a cat named Franklin. That is a great name for a cat." I laughed. He told me he worked as a financial consultant, managing private investment portfolios. Most of his work was remote, he said, because his clients preferred discretion. I did not know much about finance. The explanation sounded impressive enough that I did not question it. What I noticed instead was the way he listened. When I spoke, he did not interrupt. He asked thoughtful questions. He remembered every small detail. When the event ended, he walked me to the parking lot. "I had a really good time tonight," he said. "Would it be okay if I called you sometime?" I gave him my number without hesitation. Our first date happened 3 days later at a quiet coffee shop near the Scioto River. That conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. After that, everything seemed to unfold naturally. Caleb had a way of making every moment feel easy. He remembered things that most people forgot. The tea I liked, the music I played in my car, the fact that I hated driving in heavy traffic. On our fourth date, he showed up with the exact brand of chamomile tea I had casually mentioned weeks earlier. I remember thinking that I had never met anyone so attentive. Looking back now, I realize how carefully he was paying attention. By the end of 2023, he was spending most weekends at my apartment. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge in my kitchen and helped my elderly neighbor carry groceries upstairs one snowy afternoon. My friends liked him immediately. My mother was the only person who remained cautious. Diane Whitaker spent most of her career working as a middle school counselor. She had developed an uncanny ability to read people, a skill that often made me uncomfortable. The first time Caleb came to dinner at her house, everything appeared perfectly pleasant. We ate pot roast, talked about work, and listened to my mother describe stories from the school she had worked for 3 decades. Caleb answered every question politely. After he left that night, I helped my mother carry dishes to the sink. She rinsed a plate slowly before speaking. "Does he ever talk about his family?" I shrugged. "Not really." "Why not?" I repeated what Caleb had told me many times. His parents struggled with alcohol when he was growing up. He said the house was chaotic, and he decided years ago it was healthier to keep his distance. My mother placed the plate on the rack. Then she said something that immediately irritated me. "A man who refuses to introduce you to his family is hiding something." I turned toward her. "You barely know him." She looked at me carefully. "People can be kind and still be lying. Something about him does not add up." We argued for nearly 20 minutes that night. I told her she was being unfair and suspicious. She told me she had seen too many situations where people ignored warning signs. When I drove home, I convinced myself she was simply being overprotective. For the next several months, Caleb continued to be exactly the person I believed he was. Kind, reliable, attentive. In September of 2024, he proposed. It happened during a weekend trip to Lake Erie. We were walking along the shoreline just before sunset when he suddenly stopped and reached into his jacket pocket. The ring was simple but elegant. He looked nervous in a way I had never seen before. "I cannot imagine my life without you, Nora. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he even finished asking. Within weeks, we began planning a wedding for early June the following year. That was also when my mother started quietly researching Caleb on her own. One evening, she called me sounding unusually serious. "I looked up some public records today." I sighed. "Mom, please do not start this again." "Just listen." She explained that she had searched several online databases that listed previous addresses and employment histories. The timeline did not match what Caleb had described. Some of the cities listed were places he had never mentioned before. When I told Caleb about the conversation later that night, he laughed softly. Your mom thinks I'm running a secret double life. Do you believe that? The way he asked the question made it feel ridiculous. Of course not. He squeezed my hand across the table. Then let's stop worrying about it. A few weeks later, he suggested something that seemed practical at the time. Since we planned to buy a house after the wedding, we could open a joint savings account and start building a down payment together. I remember staring at the paperwork longer than I should have. For a moment, I almost said no. My mother's voice echoed faintly in the back of my mind. Caleb noticed my hesitation. You trust me, right? The question landed heavier than I expected. Of course I do. Then this is just planning for our future. We opened the account in the summer of 2024. Each month we deposited money from our paychecks. By the beginning of 2025, the balance had grown to a little over $36,000. There were small details during that time that I noticed but chose not to question. Caleb sometimes drank whiskey late in the evenings, even though he claimed to dislike alcohol. His work calls were brief and private. Whenever his phone rang when we were together, he often stepped into another room to answer. None of it felt alarming by itself. Love has a way of smoothing over the rough edges of doubt. But 3 months before the wedding, the first real crack finally appeared. And, once it did, every small detail I had ignored began to look very different. Chapter 3. The first crack in the story. Something shifted inside me that Tuesday morning before I even understood why. I was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee when Caleb's phone started vibrating on the counter. He was in the shower, and the water was running loudly through the pipes. Normally, I would have ignored the phone completely. We had never been the kind of couple who checked each other's messages or calls. But the phone kept buzzing. Once, then again. The screen lit up and the caller name appeared. Cleveland Memorial Medical Center. I froze for a moment, staring at the words. Hospitals do not usually call random people, and they definitely do not call by mistake more than once. The phone stopped vibrating just as the bathroom door opened. Caleb walked into the kitchen wearing a gray towel around his shoulders, rubbing his hair dry. I tried to keep my voice normal. Your phone rang. He glanced toward the counter. Who was it? Cleveland Memorial Medical Center. For a fraction of a second, his face changed. It was quick, almost invisible. His eyes tightened slightly before he picked up the phone and looked at the screen. Then he shrugged. Probably spam. I frowned. Hospitals send spam calls now? He gave a small laugh and placed the phone back on the counter. These days, anyone can make a number look official. Then he leaned forward and kissed my forehead. Do not overthink it. I nodded, but the uneasiness stayed with me for the rest of the day. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Cleveland was less than an hour away. Caleb had always told me his parents lived in Michigan. The story had never changed. But if that was true, why would a hospital in Ohio call him? 2 days later, another problem appeared. During my lunch break at the dental clinic, I logged into our joint savings account. I wanted to see how close we were getting to the down payment goal for a house. The balance on the screen made my stomach tighten. $9,200 was gone. I refreshed the page. The number stayed the same. When Caleb came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. Hey, I said quietly, I checked the account today. He set his keys down. Everything all right? The balance dropped. He did not look surprised. Oh, right, I moved some money. Moved it where? He walked to the sink and poured himself a glass of water before answering. I invested it. I stared at him. $9,000? It's an opportunity through one of my clients. What kind of opportunity? A private real estate fund. Do we have paperwork? He smiled the calm, reassuring smile I had seen so many times before. 6 months, Nora. It will triple. I waited for more information. None came. No documents, no fun name, just the promise. "You are worrying too much," he added gently. "This is literally my job." I forced myself to nod, even though the explanation felt thin. Maybe he was right. Maybe I simply did not understand how his industry worked. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me. A few days later, something else happened. I was putting my gym bag in the trunk of Caleb's car when the zipper caught on the edge of the spare tire compartment. When I lifted the panel to fix it, I noticed a bottle hidden behind the tire. A bottle of whiskey. I stared at it for several seconds. Caleb had always said alcohol ruined his parents' lives. It was the reason he avoided drinking anything stronger than a casual beer. Yet here was a bottle hidden in the trunk of his car. That evening during dinner, I mentioned it. "I saw something in your trunk today." He looked up from his plate. "What?" "A bottle of whiskey." He shrugged. "Oh, that. A client gave it to me, as a gift." "You keep gifts under the spare tire?" He laughed. "I forgot it was there." The explanation sounded reasonable. Still, the uneasy feeling in my chest kept growing. About a week later, Caleb told me he needed to travel. "I have a conference in Pittsburgh," he said while packing a small suitcase. "How long?" "3 days." "Finance conference?" He said it casually, like it was routine. The next morning, I watched his car pull out of the parking lot and disappear around the corner. For the first hour, I tried to focus on cleaning the apartment, but my attention kept drifting toward the small office he used for work. I had never gone through his things before. Trust had always felt natural between us. But the hospital call, the missing money, and the bottle in the trunk kept circling through my mind. Eventually, curiosity won. I walked into the office and sat at his desk. Most of the drawers were empty except for notebooks and pens. The bottom drawer was locked. That alone felt strange. I searched the desk again. No key. For a moment, I considered stopping. Then I remembered Caleb's winter coat hanging in the hallway closet. I checked the inside pocket. The key was there. When I returned to the office, my hands were trembling slightly. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside was a stack of letters tied together with a rubber band. 17 letters, all written in the same careful handwriting. The return address caught my attention first. Canton, Ohio. The name in the corner said Clara Mercer. I pulled the top envelope from the stack and opened it. The letter inside was short. "Daniel, please call us. We miss you. Love, Mom." My heart started beating faster. I opened another letter. "Daniel, we haven't heard from you in months. Please let us know you are all right. Love, Mom." Every envelope said the same name, Daniel, not Caleb. For a moment, I wondered if I had opened someone else's mail, but the drawer was locked, and the letters were clearly meant for the man I was about to marry. I counted them again. 17 letters, all from the same woman, all asking the same question. Why had he disappeared? I looked again at the return address printed beneath her name. Canton, Ohio. Caleb had always said his parents lived in Michigan. That was the story he repeated every time the topic came up. But these letters told a different story. They were written by someone who sounded worried, someone who clearly believed their son had vanished, and they were addressed to Daniel, not Caleb Porter. I slowly placed the letters back inside the drawer and locked it again. For several minutes, I sat alone in the quiet apartment, trying to understand what I had just discovered. Then I stood up and grabbed my car keys from the kitchen counter. If the answers were in Canton, I knew exactly where I needed to go. And for the first time since I met Caleb Porter, I felt a deep, uneasy certainty that the man I was about to marry might not exist at all. Chapter 4. The Man Who Didn't Exist. The drive to Canton felt longer than it should have. The highway stretched out in front of me in quiet gray lines, while the stack of letters replayed again and again in my mind. 17 envelopes. The same handwriting. The same message written over and over. Daniel, please call us. By the time I turned onto Maplewood Avenue, my hands were gripping a steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were pale. The house was small and neat, painted a soft blue that had faded slightly with age. Flower pots lined the porch, and a wind chime moved gently in the cold spring air. Nothing about the place looked threatening. It looked like the home of ordinary people. I sat in the car for nearly a minute before forcing myself to step out and walk to the front door. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately. A woman stood there, somewhere in her mid-60s. Her gray hair was tied back loosely, and her eyes carried the tired look of someone who had spent too many years worrying. "Yes?" Her voice was cautious. "My name is Nora Whitaker." The words felt strange in my mouth. "I was hoping to speak with Clara Mercer." Her expression changed slightly. "That is me." I hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I think I might know your son." The air between us seemed to freeze. Before she could respond, a voice called from deeper inside the house. "Clara, who is it?" An older man appeared in the hallway behind her. He moved slowly, one hand resting against the wall as if he needed support. "I am Arthur Mercer," he said. "What is this about?" I swallowed. "I think I know someone named Daniel." The moment I said the name, both of them went completely still. Arthur's hand moved instinctively toward his chest. "Where did you hear that name?" His voice sounded strained. Before I could answer, his knees buckled. Arthur collapsed against the wall. Clara screamed his name. "Arthur!" Everything happened quickly after that. I helped lower him to the floor while Clara called emergency services with shaking hands. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the quiet neighborhood. Paramedics rushed into the house and lifted Arthur onto a stretcher. As they carried him toward the ambulance, Clara grabbed my arm tightly. "You said you know Daniel?" Her voice trembled. "How?" The question hung between us while the ambulance doors slammed shut. At the hospital, we sat across from each other in a bright waiting room that smelled faintly of antiseptic. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked up at me again. "Tell me everything." I took a deep breath and started explaining how I met Caleb Porter at a charity fundraiser in Columbus, how we started dating, how he proposed the previous fall, how we had been planning a wedding for June. As I spoke, I could see confusion slowly spreading across her face. "That cannot be right," she whispered. "Why?" Instead of answering immediately, she reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. She placed it on the table between us. The picture showed a younger version of the man I knew as Caleb. The same eyes, the same smile. But written on the back of the photo was a different name. Daniel Mercer. My heart pounded. That is him. For a moment, my brain refused to connect the face in the photo with the man I had lived with for nearly 2 years. Clara stared down at the photograph. "Our son Daniel was reported dead 3 years ago." The words echoed in my ears. "What do you mean, dead?" "There was a car accident in New Jersey. The authorities said the driver matched Daniel's identification." She shook her head slowly. "But Arthur never believed it. Neither did I." Before I could ask another question, 2 people entered the waiting room. Both wore dark suits and carried identification badges. The taller man approached first. "Miss Whitaker." I stood slowly. "Yes?" He showed his badge. "My name is Agent David Keller. This is Agent Renee Alvarez. We are with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words hit me like cold water. Agent Alvarez placed a thin folder on the table and opened it. Inside were several printed photographs.
Each one showed the same man, different hairstyles, different clothing, sometimes a beard, sometimes clean-shaven, but it was always the same face. Agent Keller tapped one of the photos. His real name is Daniel Mercer. He attended Bloomsburg University from 2010 until 2012. What happened? He was expelled for financial misconduct. After that, he began creating alternative identities. Caleb Porter was one of them. My stomach dropped. How long has this been happening? Agent Alvarez flipped through several documents. We believe he has been running variations of the same fraud for nearly a decade. The investigation officially started in 2022 after a victim named Lauren Sloan lost $128,000 in a fraudulent real estate investment scheme. She turned another page. Another victim, Margaret Ellis, 74 years old, lost more than $300,000 and eventually had to sell her home in Allentown. Because the transactions involved interstate wire transfers, the case falls under federal jurisdiction. Clara sat quietly beside me, her hands folded tightly together. Agent Keller continued. Your fiancé appears to target women through professional events and community fundraisers. He builds trust over time, then convinces them to invest in private opportunities. My thoughts immediately jumped to our joint account. $9,200. That was the moment something truly terrifying settled into place. I was not the first woman he had done this to, and if the wedding had happened, I might have become the next name on that list. Clara spoke quietly beside me. He stole from us too. Both agents looked toward her. Years ago, he said he needed help paying debts. We gave him everything we could. Her voice trembled. After the accident report, we started writing letters, hoping somehow he was still alive. 17 letters. She lowered her eyes. He never answered a single one. The room fell silent. I stared at the photographs spread across the table. For 2 years, I believed I was building a life with a man named Caleb Porter, but according to the FBI, that person had never existed. The man I loved was someone else entirely, a professional con artist who had spent years creating new identities, and somehow, without realizing it, I had almost married him.
Chapter 5. The Trap. Agent Keller asked the question quietly after the room had finally gone silent. Would you be willing to help us catch him? For a moment, I simply stared at him. Everything I had learned in the past hour was still settling into place. The man I had planned to marry was not who he said he was. The life we had been building together had been part of a long and carefully constructed lie. What would I have to do? Agent Alvarez leaned forward slightly. Nothing dangerous. We already know he plans to meet you this weekend. The wedding cake tasting. I nodded slowly. The appointment had been scheduled weeks earlier at a small bakery near the river in Columbus. He will arrive expecting everything to be normal, Keller said. Our agents will already be nearby. All we need is confirmation that he is still attempting to solicit money from you under false pretenses. Agent Alvarez opened a small case and slid a tiny recording device across the table. You will wear this during the meeting. Just let the conversation happen naturally. I looked down at the device for a long moment. Then I picked it up. I will do it. The next few days passed in a strange haze. Caleb continued texting me about wedding plans. He sent links to honeymoon resorts and asked whether we should invite a few more guests to the ceremony. Each message felt surreal. I responded like nothing had changed. Saturday morning arrived faster than I expected. The bakery sat on a quiet street not far from the river. Large windows displayed rows of decorated cakes covered in white frosting and delicate sugar flowers. Inside the shop, the air smelled like vanilla and warm bread. I arrived early and sat at a small table near the window. The recording device was clipped discreetly beneath my jacket. Agent Keller had explained that several agents would be inside the bakery and others would be waiting nearby outside. For a moment, I wondered if Caleb could somehow sense what was about to happen. Then the door opened. He walked in with the same calm smile I had seen hundreds of times before. "There you are." He leaned down and kissed my cheek. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible this morning." I forced myself to smile. "It is okay." A bakery employee brought several small plates to the table. Vanilla almond cake, chocolate raspberry, lemon cream. Caleb picked up a fork and tasted one of the samples. "This one is really good." I watched him carefully. For a brief moment, everything felt almost normal again. Then he leaned forward slightly. "You know, I've been thinking about our financial plan after the wedding." My hands tightened around the fork. "What about it?" "Once we're married, it would make sense to combine everything. Your savings, my investments, the joint account. That way we can move faster on new opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" "Private deals, mostly real estate." He spoke with the same confident tone he always used when talking about money. "There's a project I've been looking at recently. Early investors could see returns within 6 months." "How much would we need to invest?" He shrugged slightly. "The more, the better." Then he looked directly at me. "Do you still have access to your personal savings account?" The question hung in the air. "Yes." "Good. If you give me temporary access, I can move the funds into the investment account. We could easily double or triple it before the end of the year." For a moment, I simply stared at him. 2 years of memories flashed through my mind. The kindness, the attention, the careful way he had earned my trust, piece by piece. Every part of it had been intentional. "You built this lie yourself." He blinked in confusion. "What?" The door of the bakery opened behind him. 2 agents stepped inside. Another approached quietly from the counter. Caleb stood up slowly. His eyes moved from the agents to me. "You set me up." For the first time since I had known him, the calm mask was completely gone. I looked directly at him. "No. You did." Agent Keller stepped forward. "Daniel Mercer, you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation." Caleb did not resist when they placed the handcuffs on his wrists. He only looked at me one last time. Then the agents led him out of the bakery. The entire moment lasted less than a minute, but it felt like the end of a very long story. The trial took place the following year. The evidence collected from financial records, witness testimony, and the recording from the bakery left little room for doubt. Several victims testified about the money they had lost over the years. In early 2026, Daniel Mercer was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. A portion of the money recovered from his accounts was distributed to the victims he had defrauded. When the judge finished reading the sentence, I expected to feel anger. Instead, I felt something closer to relief. A few months later, the community in Canton organized a small fundraiser to help Arthur and Clara Mercer cover the medical expenses from their heart attack. I attended quietly, unsure how it would feel to see them again. When Clara spotted me across the room, she walked over and took both of my hands in hers. "We lost a son a long time ago," she said softly. Her voice trembled slightly. "But maybe we gained a daughter." For the first time in many months, I felt the weight of the entire experience begin to lift. The story that had started with deception and betrayal had not ended with those things. It had ended with the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only ending that really matters. If you have ever ignored a small warning sign in a relationship, you're not alone. Many of us want to believe the best about the people we love. But trust should never require you to silence your instincts. So I want to ask you something. If one day you discovered the person you planned to marry had never truly existed, what would you do next? And more importantly, would you trust the warning signs the next time they appear?